I know, 3 different shades of green are a bit much, but that's what I have, and these two were supposed to be identical. I was scammed. Anyway, today I want to talk about what I consider a very underrated combination of weapons that you don't normally see, even though it should be quite effective. Sword and stick, or sword, shield, and stick. A small buckler is more mobile, of course, and it doesn't block your vision as much. Even then, if someone feints an attack to your head and you raise up to defend against that, now at that moment, you don't see what's going on. You can try to put it just below eye height, but if you do, then they can still hit you in the head. So that's a bit of a disadvantage. They didn't have clear riot shields and whatnot. They didn't have the technology. That would have been great. Either way, of course, a small buckler like this, or even smaller maybe, doesn't cover as much, so you have to move it around quite a lot. On the other hand, parrying sticks are used in some cultures. For example, in parts of Africa, you find a parrying stick used in combination with a club. Sometimes they wrap the hand holding the parrying stick for protection. I'm assuming the wrapping is a stand-in for the shield, which would have been used originally in battle. Sometimes they hold a bundle of short spears in the offhand, which could be thrown, and could also be combined with a shield, although holding onto that much is a bit awkward and weakens the grip. If you'd like to see more about parrying sticks or this type of shield or African martial arts in general, I would highly recommend Demonstith's channel. I'll link it below. Now you have way more coverage in one dimension. You're covering most of yourself. Even against the thrust, of course, if you hold it straight forward, it's not going to give you any passive protection. But against the thrust, all you have to do is just, cross the line and, just displace it off to the side. And you could combine it with a gauntlet, a heavy gauntlet that can actually take pretty strong hits. So you get pretty good defense this way. If you use a fairly long stick, it may seem like you have more effective defense than you do. Because if it's particularly long and the opponent hits up here, it's much more difficult to hold against it. This is strong. Further up is still strong. The higher up an opponent's weapon hits, the more likely it is to just blow through. Now, arguably, it's still preferable to be knocked in the head by your own stick than to take an opponent's blade or other weapon in the head, which is true, of course. But depending on the angle, it could blow through in such a way that the blade still hits you at least partially. Almost everything I'm saying about this combination also applies to the gou-rang, with one exception. I do actually like having a wooden stick here, because a sharp blade can potentially cut into this a little bit and bind and get stuck, so then you can actually control the opponent's blade like that. It doesn't happen here. It may bounce off or slide, which of course does a lot more damage to the opponent's blade and none to your own defensive weapon. So pros and cons. This buckler is pretty much the exact opposite, a little bit concave, as you can see here. And the handle is also round, which doesn't help either. So in this case, it's definitely sliding around quite a bit. In fact, the shield itself also does. So that's not a great combination. A massive staff like this is great because it weighs more, so there's just more mass to hold against attacks. And of course, it takes way more to cut through this. But it's so thick that it's hard to wrap your fingers around both the buckler handle and this and hold it securely. So the idea is now you have something that's functionally almost like a skeletonized shield. So you have the height of a really, really large shield, pretty much like a Roman scutum at this point, but it doesn't weigh anywhere near as much. Of course, you don't have the coverage on the side, so you do have to move the arm more than you otherwise would, but that also means you can move it much faster, and it's not going to cost you as much in terms of energy efficiency. So you can hold it in front of you, and ideally, it ends up on here. Now you have more control over it as opposed to just a shield. Now, of course, if it's a wooden buckler, the blade could cut into it and get stuck anyway. But this way, you just have more to work with. And particularly if you hit the flat of the blade, then you might be able to funnel it down like this, which is why it's important to hold it far away from you so it doesn't get you anyway. Of course, it comes at a cost, like everything, because now there's more to work around. Without the stick, you can work around the buckler more easily. You can do like a backhand cut over top of it. If you just hold it like this, that's not gonna work, but you could, of course, temporarily shift it. You can defend yourself, and then as you attack, you move it down for just a moment and then bring it back up. So it's not that bad, you just have to be aware of it. It's a little bit more challenging than fighting around just a buckler. And of course, instead of a regular long stick or staff, you could use a spear in the offhand even. So now you have something to attack with as well. Also, that way you have more mass on the end to better resist strikes that land high. The downside, of course, is the more weight you add there, the more slowly it moves and the more energy it takes to move it around. But you do get quite a bit for it. So whether it's with spear points or just the staff, either way, I think that's a pretty good combination. How about we let someone else test it out for a different perspective, like David and Clark from Sellsword Arts.
The beacons are lit! Skallagrim calls for aid!
And Sellsword will answer. Once again, the time has come.
To put our bodies on the line!
For science!
For knowledge! For content!
Skallagrim has asked us to hit each other with swords.
To see if this works.
So we're going to start off by pairing sword and buckler against stick and sword. And we're going to see how it goes. Yeah, you got me.
The parrying stick might have prevented that cut from sneaking past the buckler. Maybe. I think that stick might be a little too thin and light to be fully effective for defense.
The stick hit me, but it didn't do anything.
Yeah, that was a hit.
Even such a light stick still blocks fairly well closer to the center.
Yeah, that was hand.
Yeah.
Nice offhand parry, main hand riposte.
Yeah, you hit my leg.
That's a good way to set up a main hand attack with the offhand weapon. And then the stick can't fully stop the messer, but I think it would make the wound survivable.
Yeah,
your
but
head.
it couldn't parry down.
Yeah.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, that hit me.
Yeah.
You got me too, though.
Yeah, please
but...
stab me. Yeah.
Nice feint. That's always effective.
Yep.
Yes.
That's an excellent block with the stick.
Yeah.
It would have hurt. It wouldn't have stopped you. If it had a spear, it would have hurt.
Yeah. I think we'll take note of all the times if it was a spear, it would have been way worse.
Yeah.
And for now, aim at the face.
Also, if it's a spear, I couldn't move it that fast. If it was
True.
a pointy stick, if it was just a pointy stick,
Yeah, like
that would have sucked.
Bodkin tip and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That cut touched David's mask, but I don't think would have reached his face, except maybe to give him a cool scar on the nose or something.
That kind of slid into my hand.
Beautiful exchange, very precise parries.
Yeah, I got through.
Yeah,
I couldn't.
It kind of rolled. Actually, my hand, actually.
It would have hurt, but I don't think
Honestly,
it would have stopped you.
I think that's my hand. I don't know if I can hold
You
the
think?
sword after that.
Okay. Yeah, but you got my
Yeah.
hand. I broke through again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was too high on the stick and maybe also bad angle.
Yeah. We started off with messer and buckler versus messer and stick.
The stick was surprisingly good. The main issue we thought it would have of how open the hand is, that wasn't as big a deal as we first thought.
There were hand shots, but not nearly as many as we thought there were going to be, and I was aiming for the hand for a lot of the first half.
Yeah, not as many hand hits as you might expect, but still enough to make this a good idea.
All of the hand shots was exclusively a direct hand shot. It didn't funnel into the hand at all.
Even though it was surprisingly good, it was not as good as the buckler. The buckler is just better at defense.
Yeah, I agree. A buckler is a more solid defense, but considering that's just a stick, not too shabby. And we can tweak it a little bit and make it better.
What a buckler excels at is you stick it out there, and I'm not getting through it at all. The problem the stick had was if it hit too high, he had so much control.
You can't put the stick straight out because if you do, your hand gets hit, so you have to use it kind of like a sword. If he gets hit me with a sword, I put the sword out and it funnels it down to my cross. The leverage isn't as bad with the sword, but with the stick, it was just too easy to maneuver this wherever I wanted to.
Good point. That's definitely one of the main problems here. Although I suppose you could work with that. If, as the stick is being controlled by the opponent, if you roll into a hanging guard, you're creating a barrier here, which of course exposes this arm here. Don't ask, by the way. I have a weird idea. I haven't gotten around to it yet. So during that time, you can potentially attack with the main weapon.
What the stick was good at was initial displacement, or harrying.
So if I'm here and I'm not attacking or I'm in prep, he can use the stick to knock my sword out of the way, or just to harass me, throwing the stick in my face, whatever. The stick probably isn't gonna do a lethal shot, but it's gonna suck to get hit with.
If you get hit in the head or the hands with a stick, you're not gonna have a good time, so we were counting those as viable targets.
I didn't expect to be saying this, but maybe fantasy warriors wielding sword and spear together are onto something? There's even a historical source for it, the Gladiatoria, which shows holding a spear in the offhand and parrying with it. Although it also shows odd things like reverse grip sword parry, the double gotcha sword maneuver, and never mind, it's perfectly legit.
I did get a couple of hand shots, and both of us got a couple of stabs to the face and a couple of whacks to the face. The whacks probably wouldn't have stopped the fight because this is a very light stick. That's why we were able to move it so fast, but the stabs would have been a big deal.
I think a spear would be worth it as long as you don't go overboard with it. Just a small spearhead or spike would do the trick.
The stabs were also great because it's a long stick. It was longer than his sword, so I could harry him before he could begin to attack me, which was nice.
That range, though, was also a problem for the stick because you can't really bind a buckler. If you hit it, there's not going to push it around. It's got too much leverage, but you can bind a stick. A couple of times I was able to come in, bind this off to the side, and then get a hit because as soon as I got control of the stick, it was over.
This also means that while it was pretty good at a very first displacement, any successive parry after that got worse and worse because you had to slow it down each time and you had less and less leverage as he closed each time. Yes. Exactly what we were afraid of. I know.
That was a good attempt to parry the messer. Might have worked with a sturdier stick.
Yeah.
I deliberately tried to push the stick, and I found that I could maneuver it.
Yeah.
And I did get the hit, but I ate it in the process. It touched my leg, but it was not much.
Yeah.
David succeeded in binding the stick and opening up the defense for an attack, but he still has to worry about defending against the sword with his buckler. So more challenging overall for both.
Yeah,
not face.
That would have hurt.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Anytime your sword's on top of it, I'm locked out entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that wouldn't be pleasant.
It wouldn't be unpleasant,
But
I'm not going to count it.
yeah. Yeah.
Double.
Although double is always the worst possible outcome, that was a pretty cool exchange.
Yeah. That one I had. That one, the V here helped.
Yeah.
The reason I got hit, I collected it and I hit my own.
That looks like a cut to the upper arm, so I doubt the riposte will happen in a real fight. And it was flat anyway, so not particularly dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I ate it. Yeah. Stick and buckler versus normal buckler. This, honestly, was kind of worse than just a solo stick.
It was kind of a pain to hold. This will affect each person a little differently. It affected me a lot more than it did David because my grip strength is a lot less than his. But the way I was holding it, I found it more comfortable to do it on the inside rather than with the fingertips. And this was mostly fine, but there was one time where I parried a blow to the buckler and the stick bounced here, spun the buckler, and I just lost the whole buckler.
I experimented with different grips. This is the one I also came to, and grip strength wasn't an issue for me, but the problem was I couldn't hold it forward like a buckler. I had a better shot when I held it on the other side. I couldn't hold it out like a buckler and eat blows like this. Instead, it was really easy for him just to hit the stick and mess up my whole thing.
Yeah, good points. Combining it with a buckler is really not a good idea. You'd be better off with a shield that has integrated sticks, so to speak, or just a gauntlet, or even just wrapping the hand and padding it enough.
One of the interesting aspects of having the stick and the shield is that you couldn't do normal sword and buckler things. A lot of these lower wards were inaccessible, and how a lot of sword and buckler works is you cover the hand as you cut, and you couldn't really do that as much with the stick getting in the way, which is why I was using it more as a buckler and found less success with it, whereas David was using it more as the stick and found a little bit more success with it that way.
I didn't really try and use this so much as a buckler because the hand position wasn't right and the stick meant that I was getting levered all over the place. So instead I used it more like I did in the first experiment where it was just a stick. And here, this basically served as a little bit of extra hand protection, but I used this to knock his sword away, to try and stab at him, to whack the legs, to try and make openings. And I found that it was easier to do that if I didn't have the buckler. The buckler was getting in my way.
The main issue was the leverage.
So if I'm fighting Clark and he puts out his buckler and he parries it normally, I can't lever the buckler. But because the stick is there, I now have a point that I can lever, and this really messes up the way that he can parry. It's an extra thing for me to move around, and it doesn't really get him a lot. Never once did we have the stick block an attack that was coming into the head or something else in a static parry. It wasn't getting in the way, it was only getting in the way of the user.
True, it makes the buckler oddly vulnerable in that way. I suppose it depends on whether you look at it as a buckler or as an offhand weapon with a buckler attached. Because if you think of it as an offhand weapon, then you already know that the opponent can bind it and control it. The longer it is, the worse, of course. So then you might have to focus more on disengage to prevent that bind and control. But of course, that added complexity and requiring more skill is a downside compared to just a buckler.
There was one notable exception. As Skall thought earlier, this gap right here really did give you the most strength.
So if I were to cut in and he were to channel me right down into the cross between the stick and the buckler, now he has a lot of leverage. This was something that he could use and maneuver me around and open me up.
It also meant that they couldn't skim off the buckler as easily as you could with a solo buckler. But the main issue is most of the time you could just cut higher and you couldn't do that anyway.
It would be really easy just to change your tactics.
But you could really solve that problem by just making the stick shorter so they had less leverage to use against you.
You could still get that same effect of the funneling action if this was only about maybe a foot long, and you wouldn't have to worry about your opponent having a lever to move you around with.
But what if the stick was pointy?
We kept coming back to this because there were so many times where we got some sort of thrusting action, and when it was just the stick, it wouldn't have done anything, but if it had even been sharpened like this, then it probably could have done a lot of damage. Now I will note, when it was just a stick, the thrusts were a lot better, because if you're trying to hold two things, it's easy for this just to slide, whereas if I have only the stick, it's not going to slide.
Right, that's a really interesting observation. Didn't occur to me. That kind of sucks.
It was better as a spear without the shield.
Also, if it had a point, you had to fear it a lot more. When it's just a stick, a lot of his harrying actions you could mostly ignore because unless it was aiming at your face, you didn't have to really worry about it. If it was sharp, you'd have to worry about it the entire time, which would make it a lot scarier.
But I think this would be a more effective thing to do. Instead of a buckler, just have a steel gauntlet. Then you wouldn't have to worry about it skating down into your hand or even taking a hand shot. You could eat that and you have more grip on the spear, which is better.
If you wanted to make a fancy buckler with additional parrying lugs or spikes, it would work if you made it custom made for that purpose, kind of like the Chinese buckler Skall showed earlier. If you had a foot to 2 foot spike integrated into the buckler, you get all of the benefits with almost none of the drawbacks of just holding them both simultaneously.
A foot or 2 foot long spike isn't going to give you the same kind of leverage on the buckler, and it's going to channel you into that groove, which is going to be nice for the buckler user.
And it still lets you to do these cool I'm going to stab you tricks that a buckler usually can't do.
The last thing we have to see is, would a sharp sword bite into the wood and get stuck? So we're just going to attack it with a sharp sword. It's not biting. But I am feeling the movement, and actually, this helps me leverage him even more. I'm actually finding that I have a lot more control. So yes, it kind of does stick, but only for me in a good way. But we're gonna try this on some harder wood to see if it's just the rattan. All right, let's see if hardwood makes a difference. No.
No.
Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah.
And it means that I've got a lot more control too. Like I can wind you. I have the false edge winding you that way.
That makes sense. I was focused on the sharp edge, possibly preventing the blade from skidding around or bouncing off the stick and getting you anyway. But that's a problem.
We tested it on the rattan and it skated around and it took some chunks out of it, but the rattan still has all of its structural rigidity.
And with this thicker piece of wood, there are notches in there, but there's no shot they're cutting through this, even if they hit the same spot multiple times.
What we did find, however, is that a sharp sword made it a lot easier to control the stick. The bite helped the sword user, it did not help the stick user. So to wrap things up, the question was, if you had a buckler and you found a stick, would pairing the two together give you more defense than just the buckler alone?
And we found not really. Both of them worked pretty good on their own, but together they really wanted to do different things. So if you combine them, they neither really worked.
The issue is the stick is better at harassing your opponent from far away and doing these stabbing or slapping motions.
And the buckler was great at these strong static parries.
But when you combine the two of them, the stick made it hard to do the strong static parries, awkward to maneuver the buckler around, and gave leverage points if you were trying to use it defensively.
And the buckler made it harder to do the stabby things, both more to maneuver and the grip strength of driving it in. So at the end of the day, stick with either just the buckler
Or just the stick.
If you wanted to get fancy, make it custom.
Back to you, Skall.
Thank you both so much for testing this out. And everybody else, check out the Cell Sword Arts channel, linked in the description below. It was very interesting to see the different perspective on this, and also to see tested out in high intensity sparring with more skill and a lot more physical fitness than I can muster at this point. So, nice work, guys. I suppose the ideal parrying stick has to be the right compromise between length and weight and all of that, because you don't want it to be too heavy, because then you can't move it as fast, but you also don't want it to be terribly light, because then it can just be pushed aside easily. This is quite a hefty staff right here. So if I try to parry with this, in fact, let me put on the mask first. So the problem is, if I catch it too high up, the leverage works against me. So if you cut to my upper left, I can't do this, right? As you can see, that blows straight through. But if I catch it lower and meet it, do it again, that's okay. I mean, I might still risk it collapsing, but it's definitely less of a problem when it's a little more massive. Make sure you're close enough to actually hit my leg.
Sure.
I notice if I angle it forward a little bit, this is what happens. So if it's just straight, it's probably just going to blow right through.
I'm just going to step back
Yeah.
so I don't hit your leg.
Do this. Boom, right? But if I keep it next to my leg and angle it down a little bit, now the cut comes in, the worst thing that happens is this stick hits my leg. And not very hard. It actually gives me a pretty strong one here. That's fine. The interesting thing is that the blade actually bounced off the stick and touched my leg. At that point, it had lost so much energy that I barely felt it. And a sharp blade probably wouldn't bounce as much. Either way, it goes to show that it's not perfectly safe. It drives the stab into my leg. Do it again. Here's a potential solution for guarding the legs. Instead of having the bottom end hang loosely and be open to manipulation by the opponent, it could just be planted. So you hold it loosely to be able to respond, but then if you have to protect the leg, you jam it down into the ground to create a solid barrier. Or you could just, move the leg out of the way. Holding the stick higher up like this also gives you a more solid defense, because it's not as easy for the opponent to manipulate this end. The other end, of course, is easier, but again, if you plant it, that's not as much of a problem. And as another benefit, if you hold it higher up, it pivots more easily compared to holding it in the middle. Like, it's not bad either way, but this is even faster. But what if I use a much shorter stick like this, and this is made of metal too, so a little bit more damage resistant, shall we say. Horizontal. Yeah, it starts to collapse a little bit, but it's definitely, I found it easier this way. If you have a really heavy-duty gauntlet, then you can also take it on here. It depends a little bit on the gauntlet design. Some of them are semi-open, so this might still hurt to be hit here. But this one here is pretty solid. I just catch it here, I'm fine. And now I can actually control it pretty well, because it's in this corner here. I can't really control it like this. This is pretty difficult. If you only use one hand, I might have a chance. Yeah, this is okay. If you use both hands, I can't really do that. But if I catch it right there, now I'm good. And it doesn't take me that long. I just need to do this. Now, you can't do as much with it. And also, even if there is a point at the end, I have very little reach. But if, like, so you cut over here, if I get that, then I might be able. Again, this being metal probably also helps. It adds some weight, so I have a better chance of holding against it, and it's not gonna damage it to the point where it becomes unusable. If I want to defend against a leg cut with a sword, here I pretty much need to do this because that's not gonna work. Whereas this does. You know, cut to the other leg. Like this way, I'm okay. And I said, particularly if I have the heavy gauntlet, which is pretty important here in my opinion. Yeah, this is okay. And now I've got something here. If I tuck it in, you know. So now I'm supporting it on my side here. So that's one of the things you can do. But of course, if you do that, then you don't cover yourself as well anymore. Like this is better for offense, but, oh, did I actually hit you on the hand?
You smacked my arm pretty good.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to defend.
This is better for offense.
Right. It becomes really hard, and it becomes easy to start to tire people down.
I mean, I feel pretty well protected here, actually, I have to say.
This is how I'd use this.
I can see that because now I can't bind it at all, and now I just have the one weapon, right? So that's actually a lot harder because this is very solid. I can't really, yeah, you can pretty easily knock it aside, and I can't do anything. I mean, at least with this is a very light messer. Let's swap. Something with a little more blade presence here. How about that? Okay, it's easier like this, but it's still, you still push it out of the way pretty easily, so. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty much couch, lance, and sword at that point, which is actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
You would still need a gauntlet, because otherwise, what I can do is just snipe the hand over top of it.
Can you though? Can you?
Yeah, I definitely can. You're crossing the line so aggressively.
All I have to do is come in,
Yeah.
right? Because you're off center now.
So I can't actually bind it effectively on the outside. You can pretty easily push it aside. So, yeah, it's not bad that way, actually. If you have a parrying stick or a spear or a metal rod or something like that, is that any better than this? Well, so the advantage here, of course, is you don't have to hold it together with something else. Boom, I got that, and I've got this hook as well. This can be useful, no doubt, if I manage to get the weapon like that. I feel like I would rather have it end in a spike, so I can use that as well. So that way, if I get a bind here, I've got something. Interestingly, I found an Indo-Persian buckler just like that. Although, that would suck. That would suck a lot. So it's kind of, you get a strike with a point as opposed to a thrust. And you get this too. That's a really good idea. But I feel like this is better for catching strikes, so like this. Because now I've got a pretty good, strong bind here, right? So I feel like that's probably better for defensive use than for offense, because when am I going to be able to use this? Like, we have to be literally this close, you know, do like the Hollywood sword push, and then I can do that. But most of the time, that's not really going to come in handy. How well can I defend against leg cuts? Let's see, this side. Oh yeah, actually, maybe I have to change my mind on that. The bottom one is good to have. That might actually be more important than the top. That actually makes a difference here. I'll do it again. This is still holding on to it, like the blade doesn't slip off. So if I'm lucky, the blade, and I mess it up, the blade may just drive this into my leg, which is still not great, but better than full-on cut. Cut to this leg from the other side. Let's see how that is. Yeah, that did hook onto it quite nicely. In this case, I might actually need gauntlet still. The hand is still a target potentially from the side. So I think I would actually prefer the gauntlet, but the gauntlet doesn't fit with this. I mean, it could be made in such a way that this sticks out more, so that the gauntlet actually fits in there. I feel like this with a basket would be great.
Yeah.
Going all the way around so that your hand is in there. That would be even better, I think. And that camera turned off. So is a parrying stick or a short spear the best offhand weapon? No. But is it more effective than you might think? I would say so. You know, it really doesn't take that much unless you also need the gauntlet. It might seem a little ironic to combine knightly armor with a piece of wood. That would arguably be more expensive than a buckler, but it could be a short spear with metal reinforced haft. Or for the budget version, instead of a gauntlet, you could just have a padded wrapped hand. Even if you assume the no budget version, literally just the stick, it's actually pretty decent compared to having nothing in the offhand. Shields are great, but they have their downsides. A particularly large one protects you very well, but limits your vision and movement. A small buckler doesn't limit you as much, but also doesn't protect you as well. If you're a maximizer, I think the best bang for the buck would be a hook shield with a basket hilt and maybe a spike on top and a hook at the bottom. That sounds like pretty OP as far as offhand weapons go. Also not super convenient to carry, but not quite as bad as a large shield and all that. Anyway, so there was a lot of experimentation in this. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think about this kind of approach. Thanks for watching and take care, folks. So is a parrying stick or a short spear the best offhand weapon? Fuck. No. But is it underrated and surprisingly... This is great. This is working perfectly as intended. So is a parrying stick or a short spear with or without buckler the best offhand weapon? No. But is it better than you would expect? Absolutely. Especially considering that if it's just a stick or whatever, it doesn't really take a whole lot. I mean, the gauntlet is a different story.